Let's talk Chicago. Here with Jon Zaghloul, and we are back and ready for today's special guest. He's the host of Danny Mac's Friday Tailgate on WJOB, host of the Danny Mac podcast with Bent Rivers, and a sports radio legend. Please welcome Dan McNeil to the program. Dan, great to have you on. How are you?
Good, John. Good to be with you. Usually when they throw out the word legend, it means you don't have a job. But I have a couple now, but I'll take legend if that's what you're throwing on my business card today.
You and Mike North are legends. I call Mike a legend all the time when he's on this program too. So it's no slight or disrespect whatsoever. You are a legend in Chicago
Yeah,
radio for sure.
well, thank you. And I agree with you about Mike. Mike's career has been one of the most fascinating ones in any form of Chicago broadcast media, whether you talk about news, sports, whatever the case may be. To do what he did at the age of 40 with almost no radio experience is one of the greatest stories in radio history, I think.
Let's talk about your career. How'd you get your start in radio?
It's what I always wanted to do. I was one of those nerdy kids who would turn down the sound on the television and record myself doing play-by-play of Blackhawks games, of Cubs games. Very early on, I wanted to be a sports writer or a sports broadcaster. And while I played amateur athletics, I also knew that, and I wasn't a smart kid, John, but I was smart enough to know that I probably wasn't going to play center field for the Cubs and probably wasn't going to play fullback for the Bears. So I started writing for my high school paper when I was a freshman at Highland High in Northwest Indiana, and took my thirst for broadcasting to Ball State in the early 80s, where I learned the craft and put in a ton of hours doing pretty much anything they'd let me do at the campus radio station. And it went from there.
Did you ever expect all the success that you achieved, especially here in Chicago?
You never know how it's going to go. It's not a predictable life. You keep your head down and keep plowing toward that goal. When I got into it, keep in mind there was no sports talk radio. That format had yet to be discovered or unearthed, and it was only part-time stuff. So everybody thought you're either going to be a play-by-play man or you're just going to be a reporter. And I thought just being a reporter was where I would wind up, but in 1987, WFAN was born in New York, and cities like Minneapolis and Cleveland followed. And in 92, I was in the right place at the right time when the Score built the first bricks for a little daytime only radio station on the northwest side of Chicago, sharing a building with WXRT. At the time, it was owned by Diamond Broadcasting, and later Westinghouse, and then CBS, now Odyssey. But yeah, it's been a crazy ride. And no, you never can see it coming, but and then you don't believe it when it actually happens and they're giving you lots of money and you're being, you're given a dealer car to drive for representing a product. You kind of pinch yourself all the while, but it's been a lot of fun, and I've really been grateful to work with so many great people over the years too.
How did the Score opportunity come up? How'd you get contacted and then put on the air back in the 90s when it first launched?
I was producing Chet Kopic's show on the old AM FM loop, AM 1000. It was a nighttime show that followed Steve Dahl and Gary Meyer, the best radio show in Chicago history, for my money. And they were looking for 3 different shows to program the 3 day parts that would be on when they were targeting, and they knew it was going to be a part-time station, a daytime only station. So they needed 3 shows, and they reached out to me about being their afternoon guy. And while it was a risk, I put faith in them because I did like what Seth Mason and Dan Lee had done with WXRT. I had respect for that project, and trusted them. Sometimes the chance you don't take is the biggest mistake you'll make. So I took a chance, and it was frustrating waiting for FCC approval on our license shined a chair with my ass for 4 months every day, waiting for that to happen. But when we launched in January of 92, it wasn't too long after where we realized we had a viable product and we were going to be a part of the city's pop culture.
What kind of an environment was that like? I mean, you, Mike North, Dan Jiggets, there were so many great radio people kind of all at once. You don't see something like that anymore today.
Yeah, it really was. Mike likes to say we were the 27 Yankees, and he was both Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, by the way. If we were the 27 Yankees, it was the Wild West of radio. It was a no holds barred approach. Our two first really good executive producers, Jesse Rogers and Judd Surratt. Judd's the voice of the Bruins now, the radio voice of the Boston Bruins, and Jesse's been doing great things at ESPN and ABC7 with baseball for a number of years. They would have classic wars with each other on getting the biggest name guests on for their shows, and they would break the rules. The program director Ron Gleason laid out for who gets what and the rotation system and contacting the team's PR offices. It was a real crazy time in radio, and it was a lot of fun. And a lot of the guys had no idea what they were doing, and that's what made it more fun.
How do you think that era of radio compares to today?
Well, we had so much freedom in that era to be expressive, to have a sense of humor. These poor sons of bitches who do it every day today. I mean, you guys have to weigh every word, and it's in terrestrial and even in other formats, it's becoming a lot more restrictive than a lot of people hoped. I think it was better when there was more flexibility. I think there was more transparency, and comedy sometimes can be cruel, but it's up to the consumer ultimately to decide what he or she wants in their headset, in their car with them. And unfortunately, it's gone way too far to being protective of all audiences, and it's become very, very homogenized.
Would you say that's the biggest problem with radio today, being too soft, for lack of a better term, on the air?
Well, soft, maybe that's a part of it. I think there's so much competition now, and there's, guys aren't striving to be, 3-4 hour entertainment vehicles. They're looking for a 90-second soundbite they can get more page views on Twitter. It's on demand, it's fast, it's highlights rather than long form. Everything is condensed, and guys have to play by those rules. And you look at the over the air guys who now have to compete with a lot of podcasts, and there are way more bad ones than good ones, but there's a ton of material out there. There's on demand for your favorite shows, so you have to compete even with your own teammates. If your favorite show is middays, but you don't get in your vehicle until afternoons, you might be punching in that midday show, and the afternoon guys don't get you as they might have. Sirius XM has put a dent in the terrestrial audience. So it's unfortunate, but this is progress, and with progress there are casualties, and terrestrial radio certainly has been one of them.
Do you like podcasting now compared to terrestrial radio with your new podcast?
I do. I'm very new at it, so we're still in phase A, still very much seashells and balloons, and sending love hearts every day. It's fun. It's all football, which is all I wanted to do for the last handful of years anyway. I got tired of doing sports that weren't football, frankly. When the Blackhawks got bad again, I lost interest in that because the audience was gone. You know, you can suffer through bad Bears teams and still have audience. You can't do it with the Blackhawks. So I love talking football. And Adam Delavitt, who is in charge of all the programming and social media for Bet Rivers, was my executive producer years ago, between 01 and 08 at ESPN, the heyday of my career. And he's also been a friend. So it's been nice to reunite with Adam and do this project with him.
How nice is it too to kind of come back as you will? I mean, you made a pretty good comeback, in my opinion, leaving the score after what happened, and now you're on WJOB and you have this pretty big podcast with Bet Rivers. How's that feel for you?
Well, neither of them are center ring, and I know that. I'm not delusional. At the same time, because of the TuneIn app, it's not embarrassing to be doing suburban radio as it would have been 10 years ago. You don't have to drive by the transmitter to get my show. You can listen anywhere in the world. So that helps. But it's, I would have been shutting down to a much larger degree, even if I hadn't been fired in 2020. The arrangement that I was working under would have concluded. My contract would have ended right after this past year's Super Bowl, and the program director and I already had conversations about working into a more part-time capacity, doing vacation relief, doing Bears programming. So I already had planned to, at this point, be cutting back and into a semi-retirement job. So this is kind of perfect. This is about as much as I want to do: a couple of podcasts a week and 1 2-hour terrestrial show.
So I assume there's no ambition or thought about returning to Chicago full time, like 670 or ESPN 1000. You're happy with what you're doing now, right?
Yeah, nobody would have me, but I don't want that chair anyway. Um, I wouldn't want to do it every day for 4 hours. I couldn't delude myself into making that commitment again. Um, would I do it as a fill-in once in a while? Sure, as long as it's football. I don't want to be sitting there in May talking about what the White Sox are going to do before the trade deadline. That doesn't interest me. I've done that to death. It's not breaking rocks. It's not, hard labor. Or I'm not kidding myself, but it's something that I just didn't want to do anymore. So no, I don't even think about that anymore, honestly. Shit, I wasn't even invited to the Score's 30th birthday party to be on the air. So I doubt I'll be hosting shows there or at ESPN anytime soon.
How do you feel about that? I thought that was a little bit of a misrepresentation. I mean, you're one of the original voices on the Score. Did you feel bad about not being invited?
Yeah, it hurt. I guess I brought it on myself. I was critical of the radio station for the way it handled Les Grobstein's funeral back in the winter. Feelings were hurt, and grudges, die hard with some people. I don't have one. I know what I did for the station that was good. I know what I did that was counterproductive, especially in that second run through the Score between 09 and 14. Those last couple of years, I wasn't at my best. I'm aware of that. I'm not, I don't have my head in the sand on, this idea that I'm the perfect employee. I certainly wasn't, but I think there were way more positive contributions than there were negatives.
Do you have any regrets about your time with the Score or how things ended?
I regret outcomes more than I regret anything that I've really done. I mean, when I left the Score in 2014, they offered me a very attractive contract to stay, and I just was ready to do something different. And I didn't have an offer at the time, so I said no to a base salary of $375K. It probably would have been with bonuses made over a nickel, and didn't have anything waiting for me. But Greg Salk, who is now in charge of WXRT, at that time was was a big player at Hubbard Media, which owns the Drive. And I liked the Drive, and he asked me to be a part of a morning project that I thought was a can't miss. And I did that for considerably less than what the Score was offering me, just because I wanted something new. Then Greg gets fired by Hubbard. The new guy comes in. He doesn't like me. My time there is short. It was 2 years. I regret the outcome. I don't regret the decision to try it. And I don't take back anything I've done since that point or tweeted or anything else. I don't believe it was injurious to the station's brand as I was told it was, but I have been forced to accept the majority opinion.
Do you think at some point you guys could bury the hatchet and come together?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, if they want to, I still have some pretty meaningful friendships with some of those guys. We don't talk regularly, we don't text regularly, but now and again we connect. I'm going to go see Matt Spiegel's band this coming Sunday. They're doing the Kinks in Skokie. Looking forward to that. And I'm supposed to have dinner with Mitch Rosen, the program director, next week. So, but hopefully these wounds will heal, because our time here is very, very short. And I know I've been an asshole to a lot of people. And a lot of people have been assholes to me. But I don't carry grudges anymore. I believe that's the kind of thing that leads to cancer.
Dan McNeil here on Sports Talk Chicago. Dan, getting candid. Really appreciate you speaking out about all this stuff. A lot of people want to know. A lot of people haven't gotten the full story, and they're interested in what's happened to you because a lot of people are fans.
Well, and that's very gratifying that, so many people seem to have invested in me over the years. That's rare when sports yak guys can cross that threshold and be a radio personality and a person before a sports guy. And it takes a long time to develop that. And it's nice to see when so many people reach out on social media, or people I would see at Whole Foods or when filling my gas tank. Hey, miss you on the air. Loved when you talked about your son, Patrick. That's nice to hear those things.
Let's talk some football now and shift a little bit. Obviously, your specialty. What'd you make of the Bears Seahawks game from last week?
I think there were a few positives. I thought the right side of the offensive line, Tevin Jenkins being moved to guard and Larry Borum at right tackle, were very, very good. I thought they won most battles in the first half. Offensive line play isn't very sexy. Everybody wants to start with evaluating the quarterback. But if those offensive linemen in front of Justin Fields don't get better, it doesn't really much matter. That was a positive step. I thought Velus Jones as a return man sparkled. That could be a nice weapon for the Bears. He was the SEC's co-special teams player of the year last year, and not many of us knew much about him when they took him in the third round, but he's got some real good burst. He looks like he's very decisive, as my pal Tom Thayer would say, decisive in his decision making. And when he turns on the Jets, he can go. I think it's a real negative Jaquan Brisker is not getting reps and is missing time, because that's one of the few things defensively I think a lot of us get excited about.
What about the Roquan Smith situation? Now he's going to be coming back. Are you thrilled about that, or how much does that help the Bears defense too?
I think it would have been awful to not have him, but they're going to be pretty bad with him. And I have to side with the Bears. As much as I love to sharpen the blade for anything McCaskey, I just can't in this case. Darius Shaq Leonard is deserving of the money he's being paid because he changes games. Smith has been a terrific tackles guy. Shit, he led the team in tackles his first year as a rookie, and missed almost all of training camp before he did that. But he's only forced one fumble in 4 years. He's got 5 interceptions. Leonard has 17 forced fumbles. The guys who make that kind of money have to be game wreckers. And Roquan Smith has been a very sure-handed tackler, reads the offense very well, flows side to side very well. He's not a higher end guy, just no way. So I totally understand why the Bears left him feeling distasteful, as he said.
He said he was treated unfairly. What do you say to that?
Well, I guess you kind of reap what you sow when you don't hire an agent to sit and listen to all the things you don't do. And I would suspect what I just said came up in those conversations. You don't take the ball away. That's why you hire an agent, to serve as the buffer, so you don't have to hear that stuff. He wasn't smart enough. I have no idea how Ryan Poles, behind closed doors, conducts his business. Like to give him the benefit of the doubt. I can't do that for his bosses because I've seen the movie with Ted Phillips way too many times. Count your fingers after every handshake.
How do you see this situation getting resolved with Roquan? Do you think at some point after the season they come to an agreement, or is this going to be it?
It's up to him. Moving to will linebacker, he has a chance to make more splash plays in space, as they say, as opposed to being in the A gaps. If he's that insistent on getting this experience behind him, maybe he'll wind up shopping his wares and taking a deal somewhere else. Somebody will overpay for him. There always is somebody out there who overpays for a guy. He's certainly still young enough to command big money too, but if it winds up being elsewhere, I think that'll be good for the Bears to get him off their payroll. If you're talking about paying him top 5 linebacker money, because he hasn't earned that, he's not worth that.
What's your evaluation of Ryan Poles' job so far as GM? There's going to be about $140 million in cap space come next season. And if you unload Roquan as well, there's going to be even more. That seems pretty promising on the outset.
Yeah, hopefully he can find guys next time around who pass physicals. And, that wasn't a good look. And, certainly his acquisitions at the skilled positions aren't breathtaking. N'Keal Harry of the Patriots, when Bill Belichick says he's seen enough after 3 years, that says a lot to me about N'Keal Harry. Byron Pringle, there's a good chance he's remembered as a punchline for being the donut guy. Don't ever do donuts with a 700 horse engine under the hood. I've driven cars close to that in power. You don't want to do that, even without your child in the backseat. You don't want to do that. But those are uninspiring hires. He does have a lot of room to work with next year. But what I think would get a lot more people excited is if he could start to build through the draft. I think fans are so disgusted by decades and decades of swings and misses. They haven't hit on a first round offensive tackle since Jimbo Covert in '83, and they've got to turn that around.
I mean, even recent memory too. Williams, Gabe Karimi. There have been so many guys they've just struck out on in the first round, and it's been sickening for a lot of Bears fans.
Yeah, both sides of the ball. I mean, if you want to look at recent history, they just got Riley Reif, who spent last year with the Bengals. In 2012, if you'd have told me the Bears drafted Riley Reif, I'd have said, hey, that's a good that's a good pick by the Bears. They passed on Reif. They would have been wrong because he hasn't been a great player. The Lions took him a couple of slots after the Bears took Shea McClellan out of Boise State, who was but I was screaming for the Bears to take either Reif or DeCastro, who would have been a good pick, but Pittsburgh took him. But yeah, they've not done well either side of the ball. High picks.
How's Justin Fields looking to you so far?
Um, it's tough to say. I got a kick out of all the Nagy bashing on on Thursday night and Friday morning after the Seahawks game. And he talked about how they never called these rollouts for Justin Fields when Matt Nagy. It wasn't that there were several that weren't called rollouts. He was under pressure and had to move. A little early for me to say Luke Getsy is the Messiah. Try to be optimistic that it's going to be better. And I think if Fields protects himself and starts learning the art of getting down, and also that stretch for the marker, I'd like to see him put that in his pocket, and not, that's a way for a guy to get hurt too. But I'm trying to be optimistic about him, but there's more negatives than positives in year one last year, despite all the asterisks you give him, given the lack of talent they had around him. He still has so far to go. Playing quarterback at a high level in that NFL is not easy.
Why does he have to go so far? What did you see that you didn't like from him?
Well, I think his completion percentage is not nearly what it needs to be. I mean, when you're less than 60% in this NFL, that's not good. He forces balls still. I think he's trying to prove himself as a passer before being a runner. I think a lot of athletic quarterbacks, that's a tendency that a lot of them have. They want to prove they're passers as much as they are runners. And I think sometimes he needs to be, just quick. All right, I can see the marker. I'm going to get to it and then get down and protect myself and just do that. Don't be afraid to tuck the ball away and get upfield and keep the chains moving. Because I'm not so sure Cole Kmet is going to be the answer on third down.
How big of a jump do you expect out of Fields come this year?
I think so much of it is predicated on how much production they get out of the new guys at wide receiver, and I hate to qualify everything, but it's tough to judge a quarterback, and we had the same problem when Cutler arrived here a few years ago when he didn't have much help around him, and Troy Aikman in the national broadcast says it's embarrassing to throw some of these guys out here and call them wide receivers. It's an insult to the craft. I don't think they're at that level right now, but they're not far from it. I want to see him be more decisive, and I want to see him continue to exhibit the leadership skills that I think he has. Get in guys' faces. It's not a popularity contest. I don't think that's as easy for younger players to arrive at as it used to be. But I think it's necessary for the position. You got to be willing to be unpopular now and again.
Where do you see this Bears team going overall for this season?
I bet the under at 6.5 at minus 177. There are very few easy dates on the schedule. Houston coming to town in week 3 would be probably their easiest game of the year. The Jets are every bit as bad as the Bears are, but the Bears have to go to New York, and I'm pretty sure that game's in November. I don't know how they win more than 6 games. I don't see, and it's not even measured this year's success, and nobody wants to hear this, but it's not even measured in wins and losses. It's how much better are you? Are you showing signs of young players proving they can be NFL difference makers? And if you're not, if you don't get the Tevin Jenkins of the world and the Braxton Joneses, the rookie left tackle, 5th rounder from Southern Utah, Jaquan Brisker, the corner they just drafted. If you don't get those guys going, it doesn't really matter what the record is. But if those 5 or 6, 7 new players show some real consistent spark, then it's a decent year, even if you lose 12 games.
What's going to be your judgment of criteria for Justin Fields and his progress?
It's got to be more than beat the Packers. Even though that's something that really needs to change for the Bears. I looked this up the other day. It's not germane to your question, but the Bears have Green Bay in week 2. It was 30 years ago this season when Favre took over for the Packers, when he started 13 games his first year there. So 30 years, 2 meetings a year, 60 regular season meetings between the Bears and Packers. The Packers have won 45 of them. And 17 times they've won both games that year. They've swept the series. The number of double-digit wins they have over the Bears is hideous. How do I measure Justin Fields? It's not linear. It's you'd like to think that it's that way, but it's not. He's got to throw 20 touchdown passes this year, minimum, preferably 30. Another, 6 or 8 on the ground. Third down conversions have to be better. They need to set up less long situations on third down. They're third and long way too often. Those are the kind of things. And leadership's not something you quantify necessarily with numbers, but you know it when you see it.
Dan McNeil, still here on Sports Talk Chicago. Dan, 2 more questions before we finish up. First off, what do you want your fans to remember most about you?
That I was real, that I never faked an opinion. I never faked an emotion, that what you heard every day, some days cheerful, some days surly, was who I was. And that I appreciated every pat on the back, every free ticket to a ball game, every complimentary round of golf as much as anybody who's ever done sports radio, because I grew up without that. I grew up kind of humbly, didn't do without, but we didn't have much. And, the son of a soap maker with, was the first guy in my family's history to graduate from college. I did okay, but I never lost sight of the fact that I went without food in college. I had weed, but I didn't have food for a little while my freshman year. But that I was just 100% real. And thank you very much for investing in that, would be my message to them, that they've invited me into the intimate, surroundings of their SUV or their headphones on the train going home from work. Thank you. It means something to me.
And Dan, before we finish up today, last question, what's the funniest moment that you've been a part of in your career?
Oh boy, the funniest moment.
I'm sure there are many.
I'm trying to think of the one I can share with you. My first partner at the Score, Terry Boers, called Larry Zonka the Dolphins Hall of Fame running back, a name that I can't say on the air, and we didn't beep it either. But that was a different era. I think one time when I was producing Chet Kopic's show, and he thought I had booked Heisman Trophy winning running back Barry Sanders to be his guest, when in fact I had booked Byron Sanders, Barry's brother, who had signed a free agent deal with the Bears. Chet introduces him in his typical Kopic flowery, they said he couldn't capture college football's top prize, playing without the national TV audience in Stillwater, Oklahoma, soon to be carrying the mail for William Clay Ford's Honolulu Blue, the Detroit Lions. I'm going, oh my God, he thinks it's Barry Sanders. It was Byron Sanders. But just when you think you've seen it all in radio, work one more day and somebody will beat that.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining me. Amazing interview, great insights. Looking forward to having you on again in the future, and best wishes, of course, with WJOB and with the new podcast for Bent Rivers.
Thanks, John. It was a lot of fun. You have a good day.